New Orleans in the early 20th century was a city of contrasts. By day, its streets rang with jazz, laughter, and commerce. But by night, shadows stretched across gaslit alleys, and fear whispered through its neighborhoods. In May of 1918, the city would be shaken by a figure who became one of America's most infamous unidentified killers, the Axeman of New Orleans. His name was never known, his identity never proven, but his crimes etched terror deep into the soul of the Crescent City. The first attack came when Italian grocers Joseph and Catherine Maggio were brutally assaulted in their home. Their throats were slit, their skulls crushed with an axe that had been left behind at the scene. The killer had chiseled his way through a door panel to gain entry, a method that would be repeated in later attacks. Though neighbors heard groans and commotion, by the time anyone arrived, the Axeman had vanished into the humid night air. The case horrified the public. Newspapers painted him as a phantom, slipping through locked doors and leaving behind devastation without a trace. No valuables were ever stolen, making robbery an unlikely motive. Instead, the Axeman seemed driven purely by violence and perhaps a sadistic desire to frighten the entire city. Here's the chilling hook. Imagine living in a city where someone could enter your home at night, wield your own axe against you, and disappear into the darkness, never caught, never identified. That was life in New Orleans during the reign of the Axemen. The Maggio murders were not isolated. Weeks later, another Italian grocer, Louis Bessumer, and his mistress Harriet Lowe were attacked in a strikingly similar way. A panel of their door had been chiseled open, the attacker using their own axe to bludgeon them in their sleep. Though Bessumer survived, Harriet lingered for weeks before dying of her injuries, offering conflicting statements about who she thought had attacked them. The attacks spread panic across New Orleans, particularly within Italian immigrant communities, who seemed to be disproportionately targeted. Families armed themselves, sat awake through long nights, and bolted doors and windows, yet still felt vulnerable. What baffled police was the lack of clear motive. Nothing was taken from the houses, money and jewelry left untouched. The weapon of choice, often the victim's own axe, was abandoned at the scene. The killer's consistency in entry, using chisels to quietly open doors, suggested calculation, while his ability to vanish pointed to familiarity with the neighborhoods or skill in evading pursuit. For New Orleans, this was no ordinary crime spree. It was the work of someone who thrived on fear, someone who ensured that everyone went to bed wondering if the next knock or creak of the night would be the sound of their doom. Throughout 1918 and into 1919, the Axeman continued his reign. Some victims survived, though scarred forever, while others perished under his blows. Newspapers seized on every attack, fueling hysteria. The idea of a night stalker slipping through homes turned everyday life into suspense. In one case, Charles Cortimiglia, his wife Rosie, and their young daughter Mary were assaulted. The brutality was unthinkable. Little Mary was killed instantly, while both parents sustained grave injuries. Though Rosie later accused neighbors of the crime, her testimony shifted, leaving doubt about whether she was coerced by trauma or police pressure. The randomness of the attacks left everyone unsettled. There was no clear timeline or geographic pattern, just sudden explosions of horror. Police patrols were stepped up, but they could not be everywhere at once. New Orleans became a city under siege, its culture of music and celebration replaced by nightly dread. Families who once welcomed the cool breeze of open windows sealed themselves indoors with hammers, locks, and makeshift barricades. The legend of the Axeman grew beyond fact into folklore. He was described as a shadowy phantom, invisible until it was too late. Some claimed he was supernatural, others that he was a cunning criminal who exploited fear as much as violence. Whatever the truth, his grip on the city was unrelenting. Then came the letter. In March 1919, a local newspaper received a chilling correspondence supposedly from the Axeman himself. Written in a flamboyant and eerie style, it declared that he was a spirit from hell who thrived on human blood. The most bizarre line, however, was his promise. On a certain Tuesday night, he would strike again, but he vowed to spare any household where a jazz band played music. The letter electrified New Orleans. That night, jazz poured out from every corner of the city. Dance halls overflowed, families hired musicians to play in their living rooms, and the entire city seemed to perform a strange ritual of defiance and survival. No murders occurred that night, giving the Axeman's letter an almost mythical power. This episode cemented the Axeman's legend not only as a killer, but as a figure of macabre theater. He had manipulated an entire city, forcing thousands to dance to his tune. Whether the letter was truly from him or an elaborate hoax remains debated, but its impact was undeniable. Here's the mid-video hook. What kind of killer doesn't just take lives, but controls the heartbeat of an entire city, deciding who lives and who dies? All by the sound of music. Police investigations scrambled to catch up, but progress was scarce. Dozens of suspects were questioned, including criminals, neighbors, and even victims themselves. But no solid evidence ever pointed to the real killer. Some theories suggested the Axeman was targeting Italian grocers specifically, hinting at possible organized crime connections. Others believed he was simply a sadistic opportunist. A few even argued the attacks were not the work of one man, but several copycats acting under the fearsome legend of the Axeman. Witnesses offered conflicting descriptions. Some swore they saw a tall man in dark clothes fleeing the scene. Others insisted the attacker was smaller or cloaked in shadow. In one case, a victim claimed she glimpsed a large dark figure standing over her before losing consciousness. Despite the chaos, one consistent fact emerged. The attacker always used an axe, and almost always one found on the property itself. This pattern deepened the psychological terror. The killer didn't just bring violence. He made his victims' own homes the instruments of their destruction. By late 1919, the Axeman's spree seemed to end as abruptly as it had begun. After the attack on the Cortimiglia family, the murders dwindled and eventually stopped entirely. No one knew why. Some speculated the killer had been arrested for another crime, or perhaps died without anyone realizing his secret. Others believed he moved on to another city, continuing his spree under a different identity. To this day, no one has connected him definitively to later unsolved cases elsewhere. For New Orleans, relief mingled with unease. Though the killings ceased, the absence of justice meant the wounds never fully closed. Families carried trauma for decades, and the mystery lingered in the air like the echo of a haunting jazz note. The Axeman faded into history, but not into silence. His legend was retold in newspapers, crime studies, and eventually popular culture, where his eerie connection to music and murder ensured his story endured. The tale of the Axeman of New Orleans became more than crime. It became folklore. Writers and musicians alike were fascinated by the bizarre mixture of brutality and theatricality. The city's rich jazz culture gave the story a surreal twist, as if death itself had danced alongside the saxophones and trumpets of the French Quarter. In later years, the Axeman appeared in books, documentaries, and even fictionalized works. His supposed letter, with its flamboyant prose, was quoted and reprinted endlessly. For true crime historians, the case became a symbol of how unsolved mysteries blend into cultural memory. The Axeman represented something primal: fear of the night, of intrusion, of the unseen figure who could strike without warning. Yet his story also became a strange celebration of resilience, as the city that loved music used that very art form to ward off its greatest terror. Over a century later, the Axeman remains unidentified. His murders, his methods, and his chilling letter are unsolved pieces of a puzzle that may never be completed. Unlike other killers who sought money or revenge, the Axeman seemed to thrive on chaos and fear itself. He turned New Orleans into a stage, its people unwilling actors in a dark performance. Perhaps he was a madman, perhaps a cunning criminal, Or perhaps more than one killer hiding behind a single terrifying legend. Here's the final hook. Imagine walking the streets of New Orleans today, hearing jazz spill from an old bar at night, and wondering, what if the Axeman still listens, still waits, still chooses who survives by the sound of music? The case is closed only in law, not in memory, and the Axeman's shadow still lingers in every echo of the city's midnight jazz.